Welcome back to my pandemic diary. I'm going to start the diary in November of 2019. I know that was before the pandemic, but some of the information that I want to share with you as part of this podcast series is really setting the stage for what we saw and what we experienced and continue to experience throughout this pandemic. So late in the summer, maybe midsummer of 2019, I received an invitation to speak at one of the national infection control conferences in China. Now, China is divided up into about 23 different provinces, and each province does things a little bit differently. But I think, a few important things to know about China. China as a country is roughly the same size as the United States. But whereas the United States has a population of somewhere around 330 million, China has an estimated population of about 1.234 billion. So several times larger than the United States. Most of the population lives on the eastern half of the country. So that's where a lot of the activity occurs with respect to education. And in fact, the eastern half of China is where more than 90% of the population lives. So that's really the area of that country that has this population. So think about that. If half of the United States in terms of land mass had 1.4 billion people instead of the population of the United States, you can see how dense the population is then in the country of China. So the one of the provinces was having this conference, and it was the province of Hubei. And interestingly, the city in Hubei is Wuhan. So I went to Wuhan the first week of November as to be part of the speaking presentation in the country, and the meeting was held at a large hotel. There were about 5,000 or so individuals in attendance. Now, these were, I assume, I don't speak Chinese, and I had an interpreter with me, but the interpreter was not there, for me to have conversation. It was an interpreter was there with me to take me to the meeting, stand and interpret exactly what I was saying, all of the slides and so forth, and then to bring me back to the hotel or around the city for some sightseeing as we did. So I really didn't get to know the audience there, but it was one large room. So it's like having a meeting at a typical conference center, only the room was much larger, and every seat was filled. The chairs were, right next to each other, just like we usually see in meetings. So I didn't know what anybody else was saying. I didn't understand any of the other presentations. So when it was my turn, I got up and my topic was on environmental infection control, and went through, some of the guiding documents, the practice documents, HICPAC, CDC's HICPAC, some of the regulation like the EPA and the FDA, and then our accreditation process and our competencies and so forth, just giving a background. And there was a lot of interest in, what is done in the United States. So a lot of questions I received through the interpreter. I'm assuming those were the questions people were asked, but in the way, and I hope I was asking the questions that they had, but I have no way of knowing that. Now, keep in mind, this was November. And so, in November in the United States, that is when we are entering influenza season. So of course I'd had my flu vaccine, but, being someone that lives in the realm of infection prevention and control, I really was not thrilled about being packed in a room with people that I didn't know, and I had no idea about, influenza practices and prevention and so forth. So, and I couldn't understand what was going on anyway. So I left the room after my presentation was over at the first break, where I could do so without, causing a lot of attention. And then I began to look around the area where they had a lot of exhibits. So I wanted to see what type of products and services and other items were part of that meeting. So again, everything was in Chinese. Many of the individuals, the representatives there, also spoke Chinese. Very few spoke English. all of the information was in Chinese, but I did watch videos that, depicted some of the activities. So it was a lot of fun. And, and I took a lot of notes thinking, okay, when I get to a place where I have safe internet access, I'm going to read more about this, or I'm going to, look up this chemical and understand this process. So I took a lot of notes and looked around, and it was an enjoyable time. Interestingly, I think all of us we see newsreels or we see movies or whatever, and we see people in China wearing masks. Well, that's true. I saw a lot of masks outside for the pollution, presumably, but no masks were worn inside. So I finished the meeting for that day. The people that were with me were interested. They were staying at the conference, and so I didn't want them to leave. So I, sat out kind of in the lobby in an open area and just, read. Again, the communication is somewhat limited, and I traveled only with a MacBook Air that I'd picked up at Costco right before I left, just in case, anything happened to it, or I was unable to bring it back with me, or whatever. The jump drive that I had for my presentation was not returned to me. So I wanted to make sure that whatever I came to China with, I left with as well. So, I waited till I was more in an area by myself, and I had a few items on another jump drive, just some things that I wanted to read. So, I began to occupy my time and really just did a lot of people watching while I was there. When it was time to leave for the day, the people that were with me, that were accompanying me, we went around the city of Wuhan. It was interesting. It's somewhat like Louisville in some respects, certainly a lot bigger. It's about 10 times bigger than Louisville, but it's a city that is on the river, and so it just had a little bit of that Louisville feel. So I got to see a lot of the city as we were traveling through, and seeing the markets, seeing the buildings. I had the biosafety lab pointed out to me, which was interesting. Louisville has a biosafety lab. It's a BSL-3 lab. We don't deal with the select agents at that lab, and I think they do deal with those agents in China. But just the fact of being by the biosafety lab certainly became to be an important visiting spot as the pandemic began to unfold. I saw a lot about just the everyday culture. When you and I go to the grocery store, if I'm going to buy some chicken, I go and it's already wrapped in plastic. I get it at the grocery store, and if I go to the butcher, I don't recognize the chicken. There's no head, there's no eyes, no beak, and I guess occasionally there'd be chicken feet, but not usually in the butcher. So the way I go to the grocery is very different. Now, certainly in Louisville, we have farmers markets, so we can go and pick up fruit and vegetables and sometimes meat, but it's very different from walking into a market where you just see that the animals, some intact, some that have been slaughtered and are still intact, some that are in various stages of being butchered. So, but you can just walk home with a peacock or an alligator, or a number of different animals that are brought in this riverside town. And these wet markets are markets that have then, they're wet and dry markets. Dry markets are more the electronics or textiles, something like that. The wet markets are the food, the consumables, the fruits and vegetables, and those types of items. Well, it looks very different. You can just walk down the market and reach down and grab a handful of some little animal. You can get a handful of quail eggs. You can, you can see someone that is preparing rice dishes and so forth right there in front of you. So, it's very different than what we see certainly in the mid-America like Louisville, and even very different from what you see when you travel into some of the larger port cities in the United States. This also becomes very important when you look at culturally how humans and animals interact. So I got to experience this when I was in Wuhan, And when I look back, as I got on the plane the next day, so I truly went to Wuhan for the weekend. I went to China for the weekend, got on the plane in Louisville, went to Tokyo, then to Wuhan, spoke at the conference, got up, came home, back through Tokyo, back to Louisville. So it was a very, very short trip. The only purpose, and my visa only allowed me to do exactly what was on that invitation, and that was to go there for that conference, speak, and then return home. So as I got on the plane to come back, I was thinking about, what I had seen and the people that I had met. And although I had not been able to communicate with them, I thought, how different it was. It was very different from an infection prevention and control perspective. One of the pictures that I took shows at break, one of the stations where you can make tea. So there were tea bags and a big container of hot water, but right by that was a packet of pop-up wipes. And those were not hand wipes. Those were chemical, those were disinfectant or germicide wipes. So I don't know if those were just put there by mistake or are those items used interchangeably, but it reminded me about the importance of our EPA and our FDA and our regulatory agencies, OSHA and so forth, and how important it is that we understand the purpose behind those regulations, and that we figure out how we can apply them consistently, how we can take out then some of the guesswork, or how do we do kind of those human factors engineering approaches that we talk about. How do we remove the ability for someone to make a wrong choice or a mistake, and we enable the individual to only have options that help them do the right thing or the best thing or the safest thing. So all these were part of my thoughts as I was returning home. And in addition, now, here it is November at the end of 2019. And 2020 was to be the year of the nurse. And I remember being on the plane thinking, Lord, I hope it's a great year for nursing, that the community continues to vote nurses year after year after year, the most trusted profession. And I thought, this will be a great year for nurses, all the things that we can do as we're continuing to push, the care, preventive care and ongoing care and care access for everyone. How do we continue to push this forward? And I remember thinking what an exciting year it was going to be for the year of the nurse. I guess if I knew then what I know now, I would be looking at this in a very different perspective. But as I go back and I think about my experiences in Wuhan, it makes me consider how we do things in the United States, how we need to recognize that we are part of a larger world, and that whatever is happening in one place of the world impacts us no matter where we are. Now, as we continue to move through my pandemic diary, this will become more apparent. And the focus in each of these segments is to talk about what was happening during that month. Now, it's not going to include everything that was going on in that month, but some of the main activities and some of the people or some of the groups that were involved will be joining me so that we can really have some interactive discussion. As we post these podcasts, I hope that it will prompt you to do some more reading. I hope it will also prompt your comments that you can, post comments. These will all be on YouTube. You'll be able to add your 2 cents worth. And I look forward then some of these experiences that you think others can benefit from. I would welcome you to reach out to me and say, hey, there's something that was going on at this period of time, and I really would like the opportunity to talk about this and share my experiences. I would love for you to do that, and I would love to include you in this podcast series. So with that, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining me for November 2019 during my time in Wuhan. And I look forward to connecting with you again as we talk about what was happening then in December 2019. Thanks for joining me on my pandemic diary.